What a wonderful turnout at 7:30 in the morning by an extraordinary group of people who are here, of course, to honor a truly extraordinary man. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of Rice University to an event that will recognize the legacy of John Mendelsohn, and as part of that, look at the future of cancer research and innovation. This event is really also about three institutions coming together, and I want to thank the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and especially Judge Lee Rosenthal, who has regularly cracked the whip to organize all of us, those from the MD Anderson Cancer Center, and the Baker Institute Center for Health and Biosciences. This is the kind of collaboration that both the problems we confront demand and the city of Houston demand. We're extraordinarily pleased that Ann Mendelsohn and John and Ann's two sons, Eric and Jeff, could be with us today. Your presence means more than we can say. Primarily today, we will talk about John and his legacy in the field of cancer and healthcare and how that affects our thinking about the future. But John had an impact on the city far beyond MD Anderson. I remember pretty well when my wife and I arrived here just over 15 years ago, and it didn't take us very long to identify our role models. They lived 5-minute walk away just about, and they were Ann and John Mendelsohn. And it's not because we knew a lot about cancer and we didn't know a lot about John's remarkable history, but what we saw was a passion that almost had no borders. A passion, of course, for curing cancer, but a passion for the city, for the people of the city, for an engagement across the city, a capacity that brought people together from all different aspects of the city. And I look across this room today, and I see all of those organizations and folks represented here. That also is part of the legacy of John Mendelsohn. Every encounter, that sense of optimism, that sense of possibility, that relentlessness and persistence that inspired in all of us here in Houston a sense that it could be done. And so I really wanted to take a moment and recognize that much broader legacy. Here at Rice, just one of the specific things, of course, was John's role in the founding of the Baker Institute Center for Health and Biosciences. And we in the Baker Institute and Ambassador Jurigian are extraordinarily grateful for that role that we are able to play. So I want to thank all of you again, welcome you to Rice University. One of the things that we are intent on, and one of the things John really fostered, was building a relationship between Rice and the great institutions of the Texas Medical Center, and in particular, the MD Anderson Cancer Center. The possibilities that exist by bringing our institutions more effectively together are really boundless. And we have, from John Mendelsohn on, really had great partners across the street. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Peter Pisters, who's the president of MD Anderson Cancer Center, where over the years, before temporarily decamping to Canada, served for 20 years in faculty and leadership positions at the center. He earned the designation as Certified Physician Executive in 2014 and was named a fellow of both the American College of Healthcare Executives and the American College of Surgeons. We have a bio with you, so I'm not going to go into more detail, but it's our extraordinary pleasure to welcome Dr. Peter Pisters, President of the MD Cancer Center.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and a privilege to be the fifth president of the MD Anderson Cancer Center and to be with all of us today recognizing the legacy of John and his exceptional and extraordinary contributions to healthcare, to science, and to society. Although it's been less than a year since we had to say goodbye to John, it seems only fitting that we dedicate a program like this to his legacy and that we spend time reflecting on the career of a legendary leader who touched so many lives in so many areas, from cancer research to personalized cancer medicine to health policy and to life-changing advancements in the prevention of cancer that has impacted families here in Houston, across Texas, around our nation, and indeed around the world. Over the next hour, you'll hear from several legends in their own right who worked very closely with John. And they worked together with him, striving to propel his legacy into the future as we really build on the legacy that John left all of us at MD Anderson. Before we begin our program, I'd like to recognize several esteemed guests who are with us today. First, as David has already pointed out, John's family, Ann, Jeff, and Eric, thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of us, thank you for sharing John with us. We really, really have benefited from that. Thank you. As we also think about the future of the organization, one of the things that we've done is to recognize John's legacy. And I'd also like to recognize one of my colleagues, Dr. Karen Liu, Chair of GYN Oncology. Karen, would you please stand up? Earlier this year, MD Anderson was proud to establish the John Mendelsohn Award for Faculty Leadership, and the award honors John's legacy as the third president of MD Anderson and everything that he accomplished during that 15 years of service at the #1 cancer center in the nation. The Mendelsohn Award recognizes one of MD Anderson's faculty members who best reflects John's leadership, scholarship, and values. And in August, we were pleased to present the inaugural Mendelsohn Award to Dr. Liu. So Karen, thank you. Now, before I turn things over to our panelists, I'd like to briefly share some of my own reflections and memories of John and how I believe his work will continue to impact all of us and to advance cancer research and cancer care today and in the future. John is remembered by many in a number of ways, as a friend, as a colleague, and as a servant leader, as a physician scientist, as an innovative trailblazer who became one of the greatest opponents that cancer has ever faced. An internationally acclaimed scientist, John is perhaps most known for his research and pioneering efforts that established a new field of cancer therapy. He was both the architect and the builder behind the advancement of what we now know as personalized cancer medicine. Innovative work that paved the way to approaches that are now used every day in clinical practice to benefit patients around the world. This led to extraordinary improvements in cancer care and survival, improvements for which many of us in this room, sometimes personally, have benefited. No matter which side of the stethoscope we are on, we are eternally grateful to John. As I said earlier, I'm privileged to serve as MD Anderson's fifth president, but the institution would not be what it is today without John's steadfast leadership. Over John's 15-year tenure as a president, MD Anderson grew as large as John's imagination. It was an era of breathtaking growth for MD Anderson. The institution quadrupled in budget and tripled in space, doubled its staff and faculty, and experienced an almost tenfold increase in private philanthropy Remember, those are the co-investors in our mission, in our effort to end cancer. And John spearheaded fundraising efforts that raised more than $2 billion for MD Anderson. In each of the last 5 years of John's presidency, MD Anderson was named the top cancer hospital in the nation. I will be forever grateful to John for his guidance and wisdom, shared with humility and often with a carefully crafted pinch of humor, as I transition back to MD Anderson in 2017. Yet as I stand here today, I remain most in awe of the impact that John had on those who did not even work at MD Anderson. Many of you here know John through his work here at the Baker Institute at Rice University, with the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, and through his work to establish the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, perhaps his greatest contribution to Texans in his lifetime. Now, without further ado, I'd like to turn the conversation over to our panelists. Let me briefly introduce each of them. Dr. Andy Futrell is Chair and Professor of Genomic Medicine at MD Anderson. His expertise and knowledge of cancer genomics aims to improve both short-term and long-term patient outcomes and to extend cancer survivorship. Welcome, Dr. Futrell.
Actually, overwhelmed, and underqualified probably to be doing this. I actually wrote notes, which is something I don't usually do for this sort of thing, because I wanted to make sure I hit all the spots that I thought were important to highlight. And so I'll give you a sense of what it meant when I was asked to do this. I said, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to spend an hour or more and just walk back through the arc of science that John performed around a very simple idea. And the idea was, if you could understand in a cancer cell what was slightly different than the other cells around it, could you then turn that difference towards that cancer cell and eliminate it? Incredibly simple in conception, but through the late 70s and early 80s, the ability to tackle that problem with the breadth and the scientific depth that John achieved is breathtakingly remarkable. And if you haven't done it, you really should go back through and read that series of manuscripts and papers that appeared over that arc of 10, 15 years that led to the development of one of the foremost therapies against one of the worst targets in one of the worst diseases of lung cancer. And so this idea that a cancer cell sits with an aberration on its cell surface and that somehow you could design or come up with an antibody, a protein that would grab a hold of that aberration and block it and therefore shut down that critical bit of signaling that drove a cancer cell to behave badly is quite a remarkable sort of idea. And it is, as Peter mentioned, if you boil all the rest of the stuff that we do down, all the big data, all this and everything, the core concept is built on the pioneering work and the insights and the scientific rigor that John brought to that problem. That very simple problem of, can we turn that event against the cancer cell? And so in understanding the epidermal growth factor receptor, its signaling, the breadth of activity and the science that John undertook is a remarkable testament to, in my experience of him, the boundless enthusiasm and the boundless intellectual curiosity and the generosity in that intellectual curiosity that drove not only him to pursue what he knew was the right idea to help patients, but also bring teams of people and organizations, cities, organizations at the national level and the international level along with him to drive towards this particular goal. And so we have this EGFR protein on the surface of these cancer cells. And some of us, particularly in this era, would have said, well, let's just find an antibody and go with it. And that would have been sort of, can we get a signal at all? But that wasn't what John was interested in. What he wanted to know, and what he spent his time taking apart, sort of cheek and jowl, was actually mechanism, biology, science. And so if you look across that arc of activity again, it wasn't just, we have an antibody that can bind and it makes the cells unhappy. It was looking at, what is the signaling mechanism of that receptor? What does it do when it's activated? What activates it? Who does it talk to? Who does it bind with? And in so doing, he elaborated a biology around receptor tyrosine kinases that sit on the cell surface that are the primary agents of aberrant signaling in many cancer cells. And so from that was born an entire era of pharmaceutical pursuit, which cannot be underestimated in its impact on cancer patients, both then, today, and as we speak. So that fundamental idea that you can block the driver, that positive cell signal with an antibody, drive it into death or submission, if you will, was the fundamental aspect that led to the development of an anti-EGFR antibody that found its way into the clinic. It led to the pursuit of other members of that family, which led to one of the most prolific drugs in breast cancer called Herceptin. But I think as well, what you have to understand is that fundamental observation that was a route to whack the cancer cell hard was actually an entree and sort of the forebear, if you will, of an entire era of small molecule drug development around these receptor tyrosine kinases. And so the legacy, you can draw a straight line from thought that we should be able to understand this mechanistically and do something about it to help the problem. But the collateral benefit to the field, I think, is enormous. And it's really quite difficult and sort of blows your mind a little bit when you sit back and think about the reach that body of work had, not only directly on the EGFR sort of problem, but also more broadly on the problem of receptor signaling in cancer cells themselves. So that was sort of where I started when I thought about what I would say. And we could go on about this for the rest of the morning, but I'll spare you my biological witterings. But I think it sets the stage for when I came to MD Anderson and my interactions with John. He was incredibly passionate about this idea that if we could understand on an individual patient on a specific tumor level what was wrong, what was driving the bad behavior, and if we understood it well enough, and if we dug deep enough and hard enough and worked together enough on the mechanism, we could turn that information against the cancer itself. And that was the sort of the kernel, the seed, sort of the genesis of thinking about not only doing this for a very select series of patients, but actually how do you build an infrastructure? How do you think about a conceptualization of doing this for all patients? And in so doing, the beginnings of sort of this era, what we now call precision medicine, begin to sort of materialize. And it's no overstatement to say, John, if you peel away the layers, John sits at the center of that effort and the drive behind that effort that we now almost take for granted. It's almost like a passe, oh, we're going to do precision medicine. And one time I was sitting with John, and one of the interesting anecdotes was when John stepped down being president, he had to have an academic home. And so I became his chair. And so I got to do his evaluations, which was entertaining. And so he would come along and we would have these really sort of memorable, wonderful sort of hours just sitting and talking about science. Because at the core of it, this is what his incredible passion was. It was about the science. And how do you drive the science and leverage the science for patient benefit? And in one of these sort of talks we were having, and John said, well, this is what we'd like to do next. Thinking about precision medicine, and we'll come on to the IPC in a minute. And I said, John, you do understand that the mark of your success is everyone knows what this is, everyone wants it and can't get it fast enough, it is angry because we're not doing enough of it. And that is the true mark of sort of impact in this field. No one can get enough molecular testing, we can't do it fast enough, we don't do it deep enough, and we're not getting enough of it for enough patients. And that was the kernel of really sort of driving into this era of the Institute of Personalized Cancer Therapy. And it was this idea that if you could, again, bring people together, which is a running theme around this central problem of understanding the breadth and depth of the mechanistic differences that exist between cancer cells and their presumptively normal counterparts. Could you organize a body of work, a body of people, a body of effort from funding all the way through to implementation in the clinic to drive towards leveraging that individual patient information to benefit that patient and the patient who comes after them, who may share characteristics that you can know and understand. And that is sort of the fundamental conceptualization behind the Institute of Personalized Cancer Therapy that John was so passionate about, and was how I came to know him when I came to MD Anderson. And so this idea that we should be able to leverage the science that he knew and loved and was passionate about into this space and not make it some remote concept that lives in the dusty pages of a journal, but actually bring it out and give it life and make it a central pursuit of a large research enterprise, I think is again, the next phase of his legacy, if you will. So you've got this core precision medicine idea that you can do this, and then how do you implement it? How do you make it work for more patients faster? And this is sort of, again, this conceptualization that John had that drove this idea of personalized cancer therapy into what is essentially the modern era, where now we think we want to profile more, we want to understand more. But key to this, and I think one of the more remarkable things about John was not only was he this incredibly passionate, intellectually driven scientist, he probably better than anybody I've met in my career embodied the ability of being a scientist clinician and a clinician scientist. How do you drive from pure scientific grit through to an agent that can help a patient and all that implies? And so not only did he have the sort of the singular foresight to sort of drive on this personalized cancer therapy problem, but how very much more thinking about how you implement it. How do you think about building structures that allow these things to happen? And if you look at the results of the IPCT, how do you test more patients? How do you make that faster? How do you make it more relevant in a real-time setting to generate better therapeutic choices for the patients? How do you drive partnerships with industry to bring more agents into the institution, to do trials faster and better, to identify those agents which have promise? And then how do you decide which are the best patients for this bucket versus that other bucket in terms of what agent they might get? And that's sort of where his legacy really lies. It's in the everyday breath everyone takes at that institution across the street. It permeates everything that we do and everything we think about, even when we don't even recognize the reach and the breadth of that impact. It is part and parcel of how we think about every interaction and how we're going to benefit the patient sitting in front of us is what do we want to know about the patient and that patient's cancer, and how can we leverage that information into a better opportunity so that patient can go home and see family, friends, and see their children graduate and what have you. And I think that, more than anything, is the fundamental legacy that John sort of leaves and has the most lasting impression on me, is the ability to think not only about the deep science, but also think about the implication and the action that is required to actually drive it from one point to another. And so we have a research-driven patient care mantra at MD Anderson, and I will say John added one subtle spice to that sort of mantra. It's very much science-driven patient care, and I think never underestimate the value of supporting science in its primary conception, because you have no idea what that will lead to. And so it's wonderful to see you all gathered here this morning, and that's sort of where I wanted to wrap up, this idea of science being the bedrock, but you need the visionaries and the architects and the builders to go from A to B, and that's certainly what John gave us, and hopefully we can honor and live up to that reputation as we move forward. So thank you very much.
Next up, Dr. Margaret Kripke, who's Professor Emerita at MD Anderson, holds appointments as Professor of Immunology and the Vivian L. Smith Chair Emerita. She also served, importantly, as the Chief Scientific Officer at CPRIT from 2013 to 2016. Dr. Kripke, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Peter. I was so very pleased to be asked to talk about the legacy of John Mendelsohn. He was a dear friend, a respected colleague, and an inspiring leader. And it was my great pleasure to have worked with John for 10 years as a member of his executive leadership team. Those 10 years were some of the most fun and most memorable of my career at MD Anderson. They were also some of the most exhausting years because John was full of energy and full of enthusiasm. I used to think about him as being the Energizer Bunny. He was full of ideas and full of projects for me to carry out. But I loved working with him and the excitement and the enthusiasm that surrounded him. So I'd like to address just three aspects of Dr. Mendelsohn's legacy. First, his enduring impact on MD Anderson. Second, his contributions to the Texas Medical Center. And third, his legacy of leadership. Now, John's impact at MD Anderson is best understood by looking at where the institution was when he came and how it changed during his tenure as president. Those of us who were there when John came know something of the history of the institution, And when John arrived at MD Anderson, it was located mainly north of Holcomb Boulevard, and it employed 7,000 people. At that time, the institution had just undergone a major downsizing in response to a report anticipating major revenue losses resulting from the implementation of managed care. Needless to say, people were unhappy and anxious about the future at MD Anderson. So the first thing that John did when he arrived was to spend a few months visiting every department in the institution and listening to the faculty and staff. He carried with him his dog-eared yellow pad and took copious notes, but out of these meetings, some themes emerged, which formed the basis of his plan for moving forward. Now, one theme was that if the departments actually had more resources and more staff, they could do more work. So instead of continuing to retrench, John invested more in infrastructure to support the revenue-generating parts of the institution and greatly expanded the clinical enterprise. Another theme was that MD Anderson needed to clearly articulate why patients should come to MD Anderson, rather than seeking care closer to home and not having to deal with the stress of being in the Texas Medical Center. So John collected a group of thought leaders to provide advice, and they redefined MD Anderson as the place where people would receive, as we heard, research-driven patient care, rather than just the standard of care. This was not only a great marketing strategy for the institution, it resulted in the expansion of basic research and a new, more intense focus on clinical and translational research. As a clinician scientist, John recognized the importance of getting results out of the laboratory and into patients, as you heard from Andy. So the whole focus of research and clinical activities really shifted to a more translational research and more collaboration between physicians and scientists. And as a result of these changes, the institution grew and flourished. By the time that John stepped down as president, the institution had experienced, as we heard, an unprecedented amount of growth. It more than doubled in the number of faculty and staff, quadrupled in the amount of square footage. It grew in hospital revenue, grant funds, research programs, and philanthropy, as we heard. And MD Anderson changed from a place where we had to really work hard to find and recruit clinician scientists who were quite rare, to a place where top-ranked clinician scientists fought and competed to get into the institution. It boasted more clinical trials for cancer than anywhere else in the country, and more grants from the National Cancer Institute than any other institution. Now, although MD Anderson was well known throughout the state of Texas, John wanted to increase its visibility outside the state and internationally. And he focused on bringing recognition to the institution by deliberately seeking and capturing the #1 cancer hospital designation from U.S. News and World Reports, not just once, but nearly every year thereafter. He extended fundraising and friend-raising outside of the state of Texas to the east and west coasts, and he traveled the country explaining to people how cancer was a disease of the genes and that research was the key to individualizing cancer therapy. And he was so engaging that people listened and they wanted to participate as patients, as donors, as supporters. And John also created a program of international research and educational collaborations, and he and Anne traveled the globe making friends and connections all over the world. Under John's direction, the institution began to expand its clinical efforts away from 1515 Holcomb Boulevard by offering radiation therapy in more accessible neighborhood settings, generally at the request of another institution wanting to expand its oncology efforts. And this effort formed the basis of the subsequent expansion of MD Anderson brand around the country. Now, John's accomplishments at MD Anderson not only changed the institution, but they had a profound impact on the Texas Medical Center and on Houston. Increasing the visibility of MD Anderson also raised that of the Texas Medical Center and brought even more people from all over the world to marvel at Houston's great second industry, medicine and medical research. With all the new buildings needed to house MD Anderson's expanded programs, John literally changed the landscape of the Texas Medical Center south of Old Spanish Trail, and south of Holcomb became Houston's new Soho. Perhaps most importantly, John ushered in a new era of collaboration and partnerships with other institutions in the Texas Medical Center. I remember when John came that there had previously been mostly competition, territoriality, and suspicion. And John believed that the success of any institution helped raise the stature of everyone, and he reached out to others and both offered and sought help to further everyone's successes, something absolutely unheard of at the time. During John's tenure, we shared our head of neurosurgery and our neurosurgery residency program with Baylor College of Medicine. We shared our faculty and chair of dermatology with the UT Medical School, and we collaborated with the UT Health Sciences Center to develop the campus south of Old Spanish Trail. Research collaborations were encouraged and supported, and John worked hard to convince people to support the creation of CPRIT, the Cancer Research and Prevention Institute of Texas, which has greatly benefited all medical institutions in Texas and all Texans. John and Ann were great contributors to the Houston community as well, serving on boards of the Grand Opera, Herman Park Conservancy, Teach for America, the Greater Houston Partnership, to name only a few. Now, for John's leadership legacy, as something of a student of leadership practices, I often reflected on the question of why was John so successful as president? Well, for one thing, he was a classic extrovert. He derived energy from interacting with people, and so he surrounded himself with people, and he never missed an opportunity to entertain and be entertained. He was a great communicator, which served him well with patients, legislators, donors, city officials, the lay public, and so on, and of course the cancer community. He always had a very positive and optimistic outlook, and he always assumed that things would turn out for the best. In fact, I had to sometimes remind him that hope is not a strategy, and we better have a plan. Once an annoyed faculty member accused him of having relentless optimism, which was a pretty accurate assessment. Beyond those attributes, John had several critically important characteristics. He really listened to people. He did active listening, and he absorbed their thoughts and concerns, and which was probably what made him also a great doctor. He heard what people said, and he gave them all due consideration before making a decision. He had empathy and compassion. He did not seek leadership for the purpose of self-aggrandizement, but for the betterment of the institution and the mission. He valued and supported the accomplishments of others. He was not afraid of seeking expert advice, which he did regularly. He had integrity. He believed in transparency and taking responsibility for one's actions. He also believed in having fun. I'll give you one little example. During John's tenure, a new chief medical officer joined the leadership team, Tom Burke. And Tom had served in the military and lived in Hawaii for several years, where he developed a passion for wearing Hawaiian shirts. So on the occasion of Tom's first meeting as a member of the leadership team, we all arrived early and put on Hawaiian shirts. So when Tom arrived wearing his crisp white shirt and a tie and his white lab coat, we greeted him in our Hawaiian shirts. And as Tom stood there not quite knowing what to think, Dr. Mendelsohn said, "Tom, we wanted to make sure that you felt welcome here, so we wore our Hawaiian shirts." That's the kind of leader that John was. John was also very forward-thinking, always looking toward the future of the field and the institution. At a point late in his presidency, he came to realize that cancer is a continuum. It begins with prevention, through diagnosis, treatment, clinical care, and finally survivorship, which recognizes the continuing and special needs of those who survive cancer and the often debilitating consequences of treatment. And although MD Anderson focused on and excelled in diagnosis and treatment, it would benefit from extending its research and clinical activities into prevention and survivorship. And this, I believe, has set the new course for the future of cancer research, to put more emphasis on prevention, preventing cancer, diagnosing it earlier, and to continue to try to treat cancer with individualized therapy and to try to reduce the adverse consequences of cancer treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Our next speaker is the Honorable Dr. John Zerwas, State Representative for Texas House District 28. Dr. Zerwas is one of 4 doctors in the Texas House of Representatives and was named chairman of the House Appropriations Committee in 2017 and served in that capacity through 2019. Dr. Zerwas recently announced that he was stepping down from the House and will be assuming a new role as the Executive Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs at the University of Texas System. So, in that context, John and myself will be working together with the other health institution presidents to really advance healthcare across the state. And John, I'm really excited to be working with you, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Pisters, and thank all of y'all for being here today. And with that declaration that I'm not running for re-election, you can keep your wallet safe there. It's not a fundraising event, so I'm sure all of y'all breathe a sigh of relief on that. Really, what an honor it is, though, to be here before you today, to recognizing the legacy of Dr. Mendelsohn, an individual that, frankly, I haven't had probably the in-depth connection with that my colleagues up here have had, but a relationship which is unique and incredibly important in the environment of healthcare that we all live in and work in. And that is, how do you engage that thing called the Texas legislature, a beast that many of us would fear, frankly, and a beast that for some reason you might ask, why would anybody ever stand for election and go in there and be involved in it? And I would say this, that like it or not, the Texas legislature and the democracy that we enjoy in Texas and this country is unique to the world. And it has its warts, but there is no doubt it's the best thing going in the world in terms of representation. And Dr. Mendelsohn, saw that and understood that. And you've heard the great accolades regarding his scientific knowledge, his ability to lead an institution like MD Anderson through a decade of growth that is unmatched by any out there. But yet he saw the need that, to engage the legislature out there. And he did it with incredible skill, incredible talent, just like the things that you've already heard, whether it was at the bench doing research, whether it was engaging a patient, whether it was going out and pursuing philanthropy. He has done the kinds of things that made MD Anderson grow and exercise those same skills and talents in the Texas legislature. And I'll share with you a couple of examples of that. One bill that I had the privilege to carry, and it seemed like a pretty small, insignificant bill to me. Mark Moreno is always, coming up and bringing us bills, and I want to really, give great compliment to the MD Anderson government affairs staff. They are second to none. They really know how. They really know how to make that thing work. So yeah. So I thank them because frequently they will bring things to me and I'll say, oh, come on, now you guys don't want me to carry that, do you? They know that that's always going to be my first response. And but they brought me a bill in 2009, and it seemed fairly simple, and it was simply that insurance companies should respect the payment for patients that are on clinical trials. Now, I had a very close brush with this with my wife, who ultimately succumbed to glioblastoma. And, you know, the idea that our insurance would not have covered the costs of that clinical trial care, which was very, very exciting treatment. It just seems unfathomable to me that that would be the case. But in fact, in 2009, that's something that MD Anderson, as a research-driven cancer institution, was struggling with. Very simple things, you know. For instance, if you were in a clinical trial, you couldn't get paid for doing a simple thing like a CBC or any other simple test, EKG, things that you would normally do in the regular treatment of anybody seeking care. And I said, well, this is kind of a no-brainer, Mark. You know, I said, let's just do it and run with it. And so I had the privilege to work with Senator Judith Zaffirini on the Senate side on that, and we worked that bill through. But that was a bill that Dr. Mendelsohn took, as nuts and bolts as it seemed. He took his skill, he took his talent, and he went through many, many of the offices throughout the Texas House and the Texas Senate to ultimately get this across the finish line on Governor Perry's desk. Truly an incredible example of, you know, advocacy and engaging the legislature for things that are really important. The thing, though, I'll share with you that I think is really the crown jewel and reflects Dr. Mendelsohn's talent is something called CPRIT, you know, the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. That bill was actually introduced in 2007. That was the first year that I was actually elected to the legislature. I was busy trying to find the bathroom, let alone understand what this thing called CPRIT was and what that acronym even stood for, you know. But you know, we had an incredible, you know, entry of this in the form of Dr. Mendelsohn and John Sharp and many others that Lance Armstrong at that time, you know, who said, you know, look, this is something that the state of Texas needs to be involved in. And you could make the argument that, well, why don't we do cardiac care? Why don't we focus on neurologic care? You know, Alzheimer's disease, other very devastating disease. And I say, yeah, why not? Why not? Because there wasn't a John Mendelsohn there talking about, you know, an incredible need for the treatment of a disease that, in fact, we can make history, just like the MD Anderson tagline goes. That disease can be made history. But it can only be made history if we put together the brightest minds with an absolute, you know, sustainable form of cash in order to fund these things. And that was the vision that a few people had. And they brought it to the Texas legislature, and Senator Jane Nelson carried it in the Senate, Representative Keffer carried it in the House, and they worked incredibly hard to get this across the finish line. $3 billion is a lot of money, even in Texas. And so when you talk about $3 billion and executing that with bond money, you know, you're talking about something pretty unique. In other words, the state of Texas is going to go in debt in order to discover, cures, and prevent cancer. That is a big, bold step. And that doesn't happen with John Zerwas carrying it. It happens with people like Dr. John Mendelsohn stepping up, and he is able to articulate not only the scientific aspect of it, but also the social aspect of it in a very, very profound way. I mean, I looked at Dr. Mendelsohn as one of my mentors, as somebody who could capture an audience's attention and deliver a speech. He could deliver it in the most detailed knowledge, like my counterparts up here have done, or he could deliver it to somebody who doesn't have any background at all in medicine. And they would walk away and saying, wow, that is an incredible story. This is something that we need to be involved in. And that's the story that we had in 2007. Taking a leap of faith, basically indebting ourselves $3 billion over a 10-year period of time, and making the promise that we're going to discover cures and we're going to discover ways to prevent, you know, cancer in the state of Texas, which will obviously permeate across the country and across the world. And so, even though that would seem to be a very, very compelling thing, it obviously, as we all know, the legislature is not an easy place to get anything done, frankly. You know, it's designed to kill bills, not to sustain and pass bills. And so if you can dodge all the various ways that a bill can be shot down, and it gets all the way across to the governor's desk, that's a pretty good sign that that was a good piece of legislation that needed to get across the finish line. Well, I was having this conversation, and we'll go forward 10 years here in just a minute, but I was having a conversation with Senator Nelson, my counterpart in the Senate, who chairs the Finance Committee on that side, and so we worked together to conference the budget and ultimately come up with it. And this was obviously going to be a big leap again, but we sort of recounted the history of that bill. And even though the Senate had pretty much gotten it across the finish line, Representative Keffer, Chairman Keffer, said, look, I don't think this thing's going to go through the House. This is not going to make it. We are dead on arrival here. And Senator Nelson recounted walking from the Senate chamber over to the House, engaging Chair Thompson at that time. And Chair Thompson is a larger-than-life figure also, as you can imagine. And Chair Nelson saying, Miss T, we always call her Miss T, said, Miss T, I don't think this bill's going to pass is what I understand. We got it across the Senate, but y'all don't have it across over here. And she said, what? What are you talking about? And she said, yeah, we don't have the votes over here. And she said, well, we'll get the votes. And she lined up about a half a dozen women who all had an encounter with cancer. And they marched up and down the aisles of that chamber in the House and got those votes. And that was an incredible, incredible lift that came. But just the story is that it's never easy. It's never easy to get these things to happen. And they don't happen unless you have a champion, like Dr. Mendelsohn, who will step up and spend his valuable time to engage 150 representatives, 31 senators, and ultimately the governor in order to say, this is something the state of Texas needs to be involved in. And so we went on this journey for 10 years now. Wayne Roberts is in the audience. Wayne, thank you very much for your leadership in this whole thing. Believe me, Sept had a little hiccup along the way. We all know about that. And Wayne came back in and put it on a steady keel and has been invaluable in terms of making Sept successful from the state side of that. So, Wayne, thank you very much for your work and stuff. And so we have now seen over 10 years this leap of faith. Did it actually, result in something that is valuable? Yes, it did, obviously. And, with Dr. Jim Allison receiving the Nobel Prize, for his work and research is just one example of how when you take the money and you attract the best minds, some of the groundbreaking stuff that can be accomplished. That is an amazing story in and of itself. And there are numerous other stories to share that actually are, a testimony to, a state can invest its money into a particular disease entity and can make great things happen. But as John Sharp would tell you, and I saw this in a video that he gave about a year ago, I guess, and he used the phrase, jumpstart, Sept, jumpstart this journey in terms of eradicating cancer. And that's exactly what we have realized. That's exactly the term I used when I carried House Bill 39, which was the reauthorization of Sept at the legislative level, and then House Joint Resolution 12, which was basically the proposition that I know all of you will get out and vote on in November to pass again, to another $3 billion in order to see some great things happen. And I know Dr. Mendelsohn was looking down upon all of us, and saying, good job, folks, good job. And I know he was giving Wayne Roberts some comfort also because he needed it. He was really worried about this thing. So, but we were very fortunate. We had a resounding, overwhelming support for it, unanimous in the Senate. I think not quite unanimous in the House, but certainly a very, very substantial majority. And the reason is not because we were taking a leap of faith at this point, but because, as Dr. DePino and I had conversations about before, this is the jumpstart. This is the beginning. And the kind of research that Sept supports doesn't really realize its full benefit for another subsequent decade and then perhaps even years beyond that. That's the vision that John Mendelsohn brought to us. That's the vision that played out over 10 years. And that's the place we are today, where we are looking on the second decade of great research supported by the state of Texas and put to use by institutions of such excellence, such as MD Anderson. Certainly there's others across the state. But today, I think, MD Anderson stands out as the premier cancer institute in the state of Texas, if not the world. And we are seeing some really, really great things happen as a consequence of that. And so I'm very proud to have been involved in a number of MD Anderson legislations, if you will. These are a couple that really stand out. I can't stand up here, though, and not mention Tobacco 21, which was a great effort to try to move that, to the access to tobacco products and e-cigarettes and vaping products, which we're hearing more and more about how detrimental these things are to our young folks out there and stuff. So it's been a great honor to know the Mendelsohns. I'll just close with one sort of cute story. My late wife Cindy and I were invited to go to the Mendelsohn's house, and you won't remember this, but I remember it like a picture. And we say, well, this is really great, Dr. Mendelsohn. He's just one of my heroes. I love what he's doing at MD Anderson. Cindy was all fired up about it, and so we kind of get spruced up a little bit, and we go over to find the Mendelsohn's house finally. We weren't very good with GPS then. And so we found his home and walked up and rang the doorbell, and Ann comes to the door, and clearly we're an hour early. And so Ann, in her gracious way, said, well, y'all can come on in and wait here. He's like, no, we'll just take an hour out and we'll come back, and stuff. But John was that kind of a person where he would, take somebody who is a legislator, invite them into, their home, a very, very personal touch, along with, quite a few other people associated with MD Anderson. And it's just he had just a very, very personal touch, in addition to his incredible skills as a research scientist as well as a clinician. And so, we miss John tremendously, but I think day in and day out, we see his fingerprints on almost everything we do. And I'm so excited about MD Anderson and the pathway that they are on that was launched to a large degree by Dr. Mendelsohn, and where the state is going in terms of supporting these efforts around cancer. Thank you all very much. Appreciate the time being with you here today.
Well, we have a few minutes for panel discussion. And what I thought I would do is take the liberty of the coordinator and to ask each of the panelists some questions that will help us to really build on some of the themes that we heard earlier. And perhaps, Andy, I could start with you. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit on your thoughts of how we can build on John's legacy in genomic medicine and data science. Where do you see that field moving? And what directions do you believe that you and the team at MD Anderson will be taking us?
Yeah, I think we've entered this era of nearly unprecedented ability to generate incredible depths of molecular data and clinical data on essentially each and every patient who sort of comes through the front door. And that's beautiful stuff. We like that. We like to do lots of data generation. But I think that the next challenge we have to face, and indeed sort of getting back to this idea of precision medicine, is actually being able to make the best use of that data. And that comes across a range of activities, and I think it ranges from the stuff we already know about, and how do you put that information in the hands of physicians in a much more effective way. And again, sort of one of the investments that was made under John's sort of tutelage in the IPCT was in this area of decision support. How do you get the information from a paper or a manuscript or a talk into the hands of a practicing physician so they're making the best choice in real time for that particular patient? So I think that's one era that is going to become more challenging as we pour more data into that space. The ability to navigate it on a day-to-day basis in real clinical time, I think, is a challenge. So I think investments in decision support and how we distill in-depth molecular information into the bin of this is really interesting, there's something here, but we don't quite understand it, to the we need to act on this now. And so I think that dichotomy has to be well served. But I think more broadly, and where I see things going, is we're moving into an era now where we're sort of navigating away from a very, what I would call a tumor-centric view of the world, which was by necessity where we've been for the last decade or more, where we had to know as much about the cancer itself as possible. But There's been huge international efforts, the TCGA efforts, international efforts called the ICGC, and other efforts where we've got the parts list for most cancers. There's still stuff to be learned, don't get me wrong, but we've got a fundamental parts list for nearly every type of cancer. But the issue now comes is how do you begin to navigate that in a way that you're drawing that data into a mechanism of understanding how it relates not just to the tumor, but the patient in terms of the diagnosis, the treatment, unfortunate relapse or recurrence, out into the survivorship space. So we're moving away from a tumor-centric view to very much more a patient-centric view. And how do we begin to incorporate all that information that's important for the patient into that molecular mix and make the most sense out of it? What is the outcome of therapy in acute myeloid leukemia for an individual who is 46 years old, has red hair, and a former smoker? That's the kind of information we actually want to know. And the only way you do that is by getting to grips with all that data that's being collected every moment of every day across the street for all the patients that we see. And that requires substantial thought, substantial investments into areas of plumbing in terms of organizing that data, but also in the concepts of these burgeoning worlds of data science. And we can flash terms around like machine learning and et cetera, but it all comes down to investments in that next wave of scientific endeavor, which is how do you understand the interactions in that space between complex phenotypes and genotypes, such that we can make the best decisions and distill it down again to that decision point when the patient's in front of you. I think that's the real challenge.
Thank you. Margaret, we've heard a lot about CPRIT and its impact on Texas, which has really been profound. I think many people in the room know that CPRIT has positioned Texas as the second largest government funder of cancer research in the world after the NIH, and has resulted in 175 plus scientists coming to Texas. And they're not just coming with themselves, their partner and their dog. They're coming with their research teams, and they're attracting other intellectual capital to our state that really benefits the life sciences here. As you reflect on your time at CPRIT, what are the most important observations and lessons that you've learned, and how can we take those forward in the next 10 years?
Well, I think CPRIT had two very unique features in its research program. One has been mentioned is the money set aside for recruitment of people into the state of Texas. You can't overestimate the absolute impact that that's had on cancer research within the state of Texas. It is the envy of every person outside of the state of Texas, as you might well imagine. Everyone wishes their state had a CPRIT. Because it has poured loads of money into the state for the purposes of cancer research. So we've been asked many times, how is this different from how NIH funds grants or the American Cancer Society funds grants? Well, CPRIT's two unique programs, as I mentioned. One is the recruitment program, which is not duplicated anywhere else. And the other one was a small seed grant money program. They're idea grants, little idea grants. And those were given out, small amounts of money, milestones to keep them going. And those were given out just to people who had a good idea. Didn't have to have any preliminary data. You didn't have to have the work already done. So this was really a unique idea, and some of those turned into big grants, and some of those turned into biotech companies. And so this was something that was very unique to CPRIT, and I think has had a huge benefit. One thing that many people do not realize is that there are actually three programs within CPRIT. There's the research program, which is the bulk of the work, but there's also a commercialization program, which tries to help startup companies and tries to bring biotech companies and new commercial efforts into the state of Texas. And for every dollar that CPRIT puts into that program, they return, 3 or 4 times at least, probably more than that by now, with investments from venture capital and investments from the business community. So that's probably a less well-known aspect of what CPRIT does. And then the third program is the prevention program, which does not support research. It supports delivery of services to people. And it touches every county in the state of Texas. There is some project in prevention in every county throughout the state of Texas that brings people in for screening, that does early detection, that helps guide people to cancer treatment, and so on. So I think the impact across the state has been tremendous, not just in science, but also in touching people's lives.
Terrific. Wayne, thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could stand up and give us a little summary of where we are now with CPRIT. It's terrific to have you here.
Thank you for that opportunity. And Margaret, it's now 7-to-1 return
7 to 1?
on the amount of
Great.
money that our product development companies have done. And I think that the basic root for that success lies in the peer review process that we have. This is not that well known within the state of Texas, but every one of our projects is peer reviewed, merit-based peer reviewed, based upon very similar process with NIH. The difference is Texas uses out-of-state peer reviewers in order to minimize the conflict of interest or the possibility of conflict of interest. We strive, in fact, our statute, the legislature wrote into our law as strenuous conflict of interest requirements that I have ever seen, and I've been around state government for many years, and it's because the legislature wanted the best of the best. I know that's an overworn phrase, but it's so true here. They wanted the very best science to be funded in the state of Texas. And I think MD Anderson, following Dr. Mendelsohn's legacy, it cannot be overstated the significance he had in the original legislation that approved CPRIT. But the work that's being done at Anderson, at Southwestern Medical Center, at Baylor College of Medicine, completely throughout the University of Texas system, is really putting Texas on the map. And I'll close by saying that if we are fortunate enough to be continued with the election in November, that the state of Texas will become the world's leader in immunotherapy research and childhood and adolescent cancer research. Mark my words.
Wayne, thank you. John, it's great to have you with us, and we're excited to be working with you in the coming years. You alluded to a lot of the inside baseball aspects of working inside the Capitol, and we're all so focused on our prevention mission and how important it is. You alluded to Tobacco 21, and if we just sit back and think about how historic that legislation is in a large red state, maybe you can give us some insights into how you help to move that forward together with many of us and so many others.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pisters. Yeah, truly, I think the folks at MD Anderson and there's a large group of very informed and energetic board members. I call them Dr. Pisters, but I think they have a different term for that. But they're very, very engaged also. And so when Dr. Pisters comes, when Dr. Mendelsohn came, when Dr. DePino came, they came with an army of other people there, not just the government affairs team led by Mark Moreno, but with people who were incredibly interested in doing something good with relation to the health of Texas out there and stuff. And so, one of the great things about having MD Anderson and really a large coalition of people on board with you, whether it be Tobacco 21 or whether it be something around HPV vaccines or whether it be raising the age that people can access tanning booths, these are all pieces of legislation that I had the distinct honor of getting to carry and be involved with. But the science, and the strength of the science, that comes with this is unmatched. And no matter what other partner out there in the industry might have an argument against a particular bill, the MD Anderson testimony trumps that every time. And obviously the people that work for MD Anderson can't come; they have to come and speak on a bill because they're prohibited from going one way or the other on it. But it's clear when they come and speak on it where they expect something to go. And I think that Sept was that big lift in 2007. Tobacco 21 was really that big lift in this particular legislative session. We had to make a little bit of some compromise on the military in order to get some votes to get it across the finish line. But at the end of the day, it really didn't impact what the bill did. The idea was to get tobacco products, vaping products, e-cigarettes away from those 14 to 17-year-olds. Most of the military guys aren't around. Once they turn 18, they go someplace else. And as long as they're not hanging around the high schools and infiltrating that group of people, I'm fine. The bill's not about the 18 to 21-year-old. It's about the 14 to 17-year-old, individual out there. And I think once people got to understand, what some of the impact of these things were, they really, got a sense. And again, the MD Anderson group and their whole, group of folks that were working with them did an incredible job of just getting out in the legislator's office, putting it in front of them, and also really doing the vote count. I can remember many times just getting an update from Mark Moreno as to where are we on the votes. You guys asked me to carry Tobacco 21 and you're killing me, and I've got to do this budget, but tell me where we are on the votes before we try to land this thing on the House floor. And they understand it so incredibly well, that they really truly do the work, and the work they do with my staff is incredibly powerful, and that's really where ultimately these things get done. I get the opportunity to carry the bill. I get the opportunity to, be in front of folks like yourself, but I'll be the first to tell you, the people that really deserve, the credit for getting these things across the finish line is the incredible work of the members' staff, and also the work of all y'all out there who take the time to go and actually engage the legislative process. That's where all this really happens. If it was just John Zerwas, trying to push a bill, up a hill, a bill like Tobacco 21 would never, ever see the light of day. And it didn't in the previous session, but it did in this session. And in fact, one really with some pretty overwhelming numbers. The bit of a struggle in the Senate, but in the House, it really passed with some pretty good numbers. Some real attacks on it by some people that didn't want to see that happen, but we were very well prepared for those things and were able to get past those things. So it's again, as I said in my comments, it's a system designed to kill bills. It's not designed to just without any consideration pass bills. I think that's fine. I think that's okay. You just have to be prepared. You have to work a little bit harder. And by virtue of that, we get a better bill, and a law by which all of us have to live by.
Before we open it up, let me ask you one additional question, John. All of us were thrilled to see that e-cigarettes were included as part of Tobacco 21. And as we watch the news now and we see the deaths related to vaping that are occurring in young adults, this is really rising the concern level among parents across the country, certainly, but also for state health commissioners and elected officials. Can you give us any feel or any insight that you have now, recognizing that this is fairly fresh in terms of how our elected officials in Texas are viewing this?
Right. Where they may have viewed it a little bit with some trepidation related just to tobacco, because you get into all this freedom stuff about at age 18, you should be able to go out there and do anything. You go into the military, you put yourself in harm's way, and so therefore you ought to be able to go out and buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke them. I have always struggled with why, something like smoking and the harmful effects of it should be equated with something as honorable as being in the military and defending our country. But that being said, that is something that you end up dealing with. But what I'll say, Dr. Pisters, the epidemic of the e-cigarettes, and even as young as the elementary school kids, and the vaping products, and really the vaping product people were the only ones that came out as a stakeholder against this bill. The e-cigarette people actually supported it, Juul and others. And so I think that's probably what really put it over the finish line. When you talk to a lot of the members have kids that are in elementary, junior high, high school, And when I would speak to them about that and say, you know, this includes the vaping products also and the e-cigarettes, they go, oh, really? And so all of a sudden they say, now there's a real problem that they can connect to. And so that really got quite a number of people over the finish line by having those things included in the bill. So whether they had ambivalence about the tobacco products and some of their political philosophies, the reality came down when they started to see what these e-cigarette and vaping products and the prevalence in the schools.
Well, I think everyone in the room can rest assured that this is going to be on our agenda as we move to the next legislative session, and we'll be looking to you for insights, John, in helping us to formulate a strategy.
And I would just say, you know, Greg Bonin, neurosurgeon who I work with closely on a lot of issues, you know, I asked him his support for it, and he says, yeah, you got my support. He says, but I want an amendment on there that's going to outlaw these flavors that they put in these things, you know, because that's obviously going towards the kids. And I said, that's a great idea for 2021, Greg. I said, but let me get this thing across the finish line in the form that it is, because it came over to me from the Senate with a pretty narrow vote. And in order to get it across the finish line, I had to deliver a bill that was pretty much unchanged, or else the senator was going to have a hard time getting that across the finish line again. And so that was the promise that I made, but that's obviously something that needs to be addressed, and I think can be addressed pretty easily, you know, through the next legislative session, to say, look, these continue to have an attractiveness to children. Flavors are part of that. Let's amend this law to say that, you know, these flavors got to be taken out. So.
The stakes are very high in Texas. We have a population of 28 million, and in this past legislative session, I learned that we have one of the youngest populations in the nation. Only Alaska and Utah have a younger population than Texas, and together they have a population of 6 million. So in our state, we have a lot of young people. They're all at risk, and it's really up to us to work together to make sure that we do the right thing for them, not only in terms of prevention, but also in terms of the rest of their health care and the education that will be available, K through 12 and higher education, as these kids grow up here in the greatest state in the nation.
I'd like to say, as a reflection of this last legislative session, Dr. Pisters, you were instrumental in helping us with everything that we did from a healthcare point of view, specifically related to the bills that were in play. Incredibly powerful to have the president of MD Anderson come up, spend that time face-to-face with the members. So thank you for the time that you spent really advocating on behalf of these big issues. It's a big deal.
Well, we have a microphone. Let's open it up for questions and comments, because I know there are many people here. Over here.
Good morning. My name is John Marsh. Thank you very much, Dr. Zoll, for bringing this program to us. It's very inspiring to hear about the legacy of Dr. Mendelsohn and the things being done, especially through CPRIT and other things to fight cancer. One of the things that occurs to me in this is, as challenging, let's say, the Texas legislature might be, we voters of Texas may also be a challenge. My career started in industry, and I learned the hard way the pitfalls of assuming. So we know this is coming to vote, but I would hate to assume that the voters of Texas will actually vote it in. I've talked with a lot of people, even those who are connected to medicine, who do not know what CPRIT is. I've memorized, of course, what it stands for, right? As everyone here has by now. They don't even know what CPRIT is. So my question is, what should we be doing to go out there and let people know about CPRIT and make sure they vote? Obviously, they're going to vote one way or the other, but if we get them informed, I think they will vote it in. How do we do that?
Maybe I'll begin, and then we'll pivot to Wayne. This session, really, which has really talked about John, his legacy, the impact that John had on CPRIT, has also created opportunity for us to focus on the November election and how we can really create awareness. And as I was mentioning a moment ago, there should be a sense of urgency here in Texas because fundamentally we're here to help the youth of Texas. They're the ones that are going to carry the economy forward in our state. We have tremendous obligations to them. Wayne, what are your thoughts? And maybe you can share any information on polling information that we might have.
I need to be real careful here. I am, excuse me, I am a state employee and I am prohibited from lobbying. However, as Dr. Zerwas knows, as are you, I can provide information. And I can relay to you what I have heard that is going on. And I believe, Charlie Gagan here from the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network can go into greater detail, but there is going to be a campaign, if you will, comprised of a number of advocates. I understand that there will be a PAC established. There will be at least a strong social media campaign to get the word out. I am aware of some significant players in the Metroplex area that are getting involved. I expect the same to occur in the Houston area. So I think as we get closer to the election, you will be hearing more. But that's really about as far as I can take it. The last poll I've heard, though, is it is somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90, 87%, somewhere in there, when asked if they support continuing research at an institute like CPRIT, that it's 85, 87% in favor of it. Even those from the more traditionally conservative elements of the state electorate, it's in the neighborhood of 75 to 77%. But without doubt, there is concern about the voters getting out. When CPRIT was passed in 2007, it was approved with less than 1 million voters turning out. And you get small turnout like that, something negative occurs, somebody goes after it because of the method of finance that's being proposed, it is a concern. So we just would encourage people to, I guess as far as I can go, is vote if you want.
Here, can I make a comment?
Yes,
There
Margaret.
are, Kristen, my deputy, makes an excellent point to the fact that I can only provide information. We are in search of opportunities for me, my staff, my board, to get out and talk to as many groups. We earlier today heard of one significant group, bankers, who were totally unaware of CPRIT. If you know a venue or an opportunity for us to get out and provide our information, we would love to do it. Right now, I've got something, my staff has something like 45 opportunities across the state. We need more. I will close by saying that on our website, lower right-hand corner, on the front page, there is a section called Reports, and there are tons of metrics. Dr. Zerwas, back when CPRIT was originally created in 2007, I characterized the vote of the legislature and the citizens as being aspirational, what we hope to get out of funding cancer research. In 2019, the vote was based on hard metrics and progress and momentum. And that progress, the specific metrics to document that are on our website. So please take a look at that.
Margaret.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that the CPRIT staff can't do the work here. They're not really allowed to go out and lobby in favor of legislation. But the institutions can do more to raise the visibility of CPRIT. For example, every time you write an article about someone who was recruited by CPRIT, that needs to go in the article. And I was just amazed to see how little of the publicity about Dr. Allison actually mentioned that he was recruited back to Texas on the basis of a Sept Scholar Award. So you can do a lot in terms of helping raise the visibility of Sept by keeping the media informed of everything that's happening with Sept grants, Sept projects, and so on. So I would encourage everybody to do that. Now, I can lobby all I want because I'm retired, so here I am.
Yes, you can.
First of all, thank you. This really brings back a lot of memories. We're all very, very close to John, and it's just wonderful how each of you have captured the many dimensions of this incredible human being. And also to his family, I know how difficult that job is, and it's not possible to do without the love and support of your family. And so, what you're hearing is as much, John's contributions as it is yours. So thank you on behalf of the community for helping him help others. It's really quite remarkable. And Peter, I look at the legacy and the tradition of the position that you now hold, and I'm just very proud of what you've done. And one of the things that I think is underappreciated is the broad impact that you and John's vision had of the network and the expansion, because while 70% of the patients come from elsewhere, most of those patients in need of MD Anderson level care really can't. And so the vision that you had, that John had, to spread our knowledge is really important and quite impactful. Ultimately, our network reached a third of the human population through the relationships that we had. And that's a tremendous legacy, and I think one that will endure for both you and John for many years to come. Now, I can talk a little bit more about Sept. And Wayne, thank you for your leadership, and Margaret for stepping in at a critical point. I think that we have Andy here, who started the field of cancer genomics. We have Julia Geretta, who's the Chief Scientific Officer who headed Merck's oncology franchise worldwide. We have Jim Allison, of course, and many others. There's about 250 recruitments over about a 5-year period at MD Anderson that are on this level. And this is really, I think, the most impactful legacy of Sept. It's all about talent. It's all about putting the team on the field. And to be able to attract this level of talent is really quite remarkable. And I thank Andy for capturing the science that John had. And I know that he was very proud of you and the fact that you were able to take the lance down the field for him and finish the job. So thank you for what you've done and so on. And John, it really does take leadership. Mendelsohn and Mickey LeMaitre before him, the vision of cancer prevention medicine, the moonshots and the effort in cancer control. Vision without execution is just hallucination, as Tom Edison once said. So your ability to really take the tanning bed legislation and T21, what's very important to appreciate is that as Texas goes, so goes the nation. And when we passed the tanning bed legislation, we now have half of the states since passing legislation, and hopefully there will be federal law soon. And just in the context of T21, which I think will become federal law in the years ahead, again, partly because of what Texas has done, you're talking over 50,000 lives per year, every year, and almost $40 billion in healthcare savings. So that's a pretty good return on investment. And so the impact that you've had, and now that the leadership position you're going to have, I think is going to be great for our state, the nation, and the world. So I thank each of you, and I really look fondly on my many interactions with John. Margaret, I'll say that I used to have lunch with him once a month, and not often, very often it would be, when we were talking about academic issues, it'd be, well, what would Margaret do? So you were quite respected as well, and I thank you for what you've done with John.
Thank you, Ron.
I'd like to thank every healthcare professional, every scientist in this room. I'm a living example of your work. I have been so busted up over my years. I've had to learn to walk again. I wouldn't even be standing here without a lot of your help. Thank you very, very much. As a follow-up to these questions in this wonderful panel, it's breathtaking to me to stand here and think about the wondrous collaborative opportunities in medical science between one of the greatest universities in the world, Rice University, that I love, and the greatest cancer center in the world, MD Anderson, that I love. Would the panel and Dr. Peño please speak about the future of collaborative medical science, particularly with the advent of the development of the TMCX? Thank you.
David, do you want to add anything to that, and then I could jump in? While they're getting you the microphone, let me just say we are thrilled to be in the same community as Rice University, and when we look at the caliber of the science and the talent that's here, the policy work that occurs here at the Baker Institute, and we look at the challenges that are ahead, there couldn't be a better partner to be our next door neighbor. As we're thinking about that, we're already planning collaborations. David and I have gone together on a number of occasions to talk about data science and artificial intelligence. The Rice University data science team just made a trip to Toronto to meet with Dr. David Jaffrey, our new Chief Technology and Data Officer. David, please stand up and welcome. And so as David comes over to Rice University in October to meet with the team here to talk about collaborations, and as we deepen the collaborations around the state, we really see tremendous opportunities. Perhaps we could all, I think, reflect on an element of your question and comment that was implicit, that perhaps we haven't captured the greatest value that's possible out of the collaborations from a phenomenal university like Rice University and the #1 cancer center in the world. And I know that David and I are committed to make that happen. David, do you want to add anything?
No, but I will. Unlike everybody, as most of you know, I'm a large disappointment to my mother, who had hoped that I would end up being a doctor. And the best thing about coming to Rice, well, I shouldn't say the best thing, but one of the best things from her point of view was that everybody here calls me doctor, even though I'm not. And so she loves to come down and visit. The potential here is really enormous. And, you know, John was, and I think Margaret really captured this, John was such a force in bringing people together across the medical center, and we need more of it. If you look at this area, we have, in many ways, the greatest medical center in the world, but it's not really going to be that unless we continue to build across these remarkable institutions. Every single one of them. I mean, what we have here in terms of course, MD Anderson, Baylor, Methodist Hospital, UT Health, Veterans Hospital, Memorial Hermann. I mean, the list goes on and on, all outstanding institutions that we need to find ways together. Actually, Texas is changing, but is almost peculiar in the degree to which medical institutions were separated from universities. There are other places like that, like Russia, like China used to be, and they brought those institutions very much back together. Now, that's not to say we need to be brought, you know, we need to necessarily merge with each other, but we do need to make a concentrated effort in lowering all of the barriers, lowering the barriers to joint research, lowering the barriers in terms of regulation. We have a team here that's been focused on that because at the end of the day, the most important driving force is this incredible staff that we have recruited. And I want to add a word of support to CPRIT, which for Rice, even though without a medical school, we're so deeply engaged in medical research that for us, CPRIT has also been a major force in recruiting truly remarkable, the best of the best from across the entire country. I just couldn't understate, or overstate rather, the impact that CPRIT has had on the ability of institutions in Texas to reach out across the world and identify the best people to bring to this state. And they're what ultimately does it. So we're interested in continuing to deepen those relationships. I know Ron was a great partner in that, and I would say a very generous partner. Peter has been. And I think what it really takes is all of us need to not just do what our first choice is, because our first choice tends to be a little bit just looking at ourselves, but to figure out what we can do jointly. And I would really encourage everybody in this room. It's a great question. Thank you for the question. But it will take all of us, whether you're a philanthropist or a doctor or a researcher or on a governing board of any of these organizations, every chance you have, and it's not that I love being pushed around by my board and other things, but every chance that you have to encourage us to work more deeply together, I think can really encourage us to do so. So thank you all very much for that.
Great. Jeff.
Hi, good morning. I would love to hear from Dr. Kripke, Dr. Futriel, Dr. Pisters, a tangible anecdote that to you illustrates what's most exciting about the future of applied cancer research. So something that we can really sink our teeth into, a tangible anecdote that you think evokes where you see the most excitement in applied cancer research. Thank you.
Margaret, do you want to go first, and we'll go down the line?
Well, I'm happy to start that. Actually, one of the reasons that I went back to work after I retired and went to CPRIT was to try to implement some or stimulate research in a particular area, which is environmental carcinogenesis. What is it in our environment that causes cancer? Because with all the focus and excitement about cancer treatment, cancer prevention has sort of been left behind. And if you think about it, the biggest impact on the cancer burden would be through prevention rather than through treatment, trying to treat people who are already ill. So I think for me, at least, the focus, a new focus and a new effort should be on prevention. And one of the ways that has not yet been explored and implemented is through things in our environment that are causing us difficulties. And we know there are many of those. And so I have been actually working to try to raise the visibility of this issue within the cancer research community. And I think it's actually beginning to happen. So I'm very happy about that.
Andy.
So I'm going to go for the probably the most obvious one. And in many ways, you know, the advent of immunotherapy mirrors a lot of what we were talking about, this arc of research activity from the basic to the applied in terms of what John was doing in the EGFR space. If you look at the fundamental biology that was required to understand why the immune system isn't doing its job in cancer patients, and the ability to again sort of take that fundamental framework of basic scientific knowledge and turn that into therapies which have essentially had completely profound results in numerous patients and continue to be explored. That's probably the most cogent and I think most overwhelming example of how do you go from basic to applied to application to opening up an entirely new field and indeed reinterpreting other therapies that we know can or cannot work in some other instance, radiation, other drug treatments. It's all about sort of the system and the immune system and how do we understand that. So I think that's by far and away, and certainly in my career, the one example of how do you go from basic to apply that actually has made the most difference, and actually I think serves as a paradigm for how we should support the entire range of activity.
For me, probably the best example I have, the best anecdote is from yesterday morning at breakfast. And I like to get together with young faculty at all levels and hear from them. And when I get with the gifted and talented faculty and I listen to them, you see the passion that they have for our mission. You see the talent that they have. You see the creativity of their ideas. And as we build off that energy and we tap into those ideas for our strategic plan, we really can see that we're creating the future of the organization for them. They are the ones that are going to help us to end cancer. And we are the ones that are going to create the allocation of resources, the programs, the physician scientist tracks, the unbelievable environments, the collaboration, the synergies, the partnerships that will really enable us to help them to do what they're here to do. And I'm just so energized by the young scientists and the young faculty members that we have at MD Anderson. Most of their names you don't know, but they are the energy and the future of the organization, and they're the ones ultimately that we serve. We're close to the end of the hour, and perhaps I can just close with a few comments. This has just been an extraordinary session for us to get together to celebrate the legacy of an incredible man who has done so much for all of us, so much for MD Anderson, so much for society. It's also been an opportunity for us to reflect about many of the unique aspects of Texas, how fortunate we are to be here, the opportunities that are created by the economy in Texas, by the accretion of human capital here, by the UT system, which now has the second largest university endowment in the world, just bypassing Yale University, $32 billion. A few more good years in the Permian Basin, and we'll overtake Harvard. That's a certainty. When you see those resources from that endowment by Constitution directed only to healthcare and education, you see our population growing from 28 million to 41 million. You see us at the threshold of a new renewal of CPRIT. You see, amidst all of this, the #1 cancer center in the world. There couldn't possibly be a better time to be in Texas for what we're here to do. And I'm really confident that we can do great things and that we will commit to Anne, to the Mendelsohn family, that we will build on the incredible legacy of John. So thank you very much.